Okay, hello everyone. Here to kind of go back and finish up one of the prior presentations. A couple of you have emailed me saying that I'm missing some slides. Um, let me go back and address that here. So if we go back to the electrophysiology, oops, see the electrophysiology slides, there was a little bit of a difference in the slides that were uploaded and the slides that I have on my PowerPoints here. So somehow, some way, the first couple of slides got omitted, deleted, skipped. I'm not sure what happened, but let me go back and address those here. So the big discussion on polarity when we talk about the heart, right? So this takes us back to 2401. If you remember, with the nervous system and action potentials, nerve impulses, all that deals with electrical changes, right? From a negative state to a positive state. So this is just generic, right? Not necessarily applying to the heart, but if we look at most cells, most nervous cells, let's say, we're going to have a resting potential of, let's say, -70. And that's their resting polarity, right? So the negative, right? Negatives. When we reach a certain aspect, we start to shift towards zero, right? And how do we go from a negative towards zero? Well, we have to allow more positives in, right? And we're going to call that then depolarization. So the addition of positive charges into the system. So we go towards zero, and we even go beyond zero to the positive realm, right? So we're up here about +30, right? Now, after a little while, right, we have that depolarization event, and then now we start to shuttle out some of those positives, and we start to then repolarize. That's the repolarization aspect. In some situations, we will undershoot. We will hyperpolarize beyond resting potential, and then eventually we get back to our resting potential. The idea of threshold, in order for all of our gates to open, our sodium channels, our calcium channels, our potassium channels, we reach a certain level of depolarization, right? So that's going to be our threshold. So we slowly start to go towards positive. We reach a certain level of threshold that opens up the gates and flooding in now our positive charges, right? So for depolarization, then repolarization, and that's sort of the vocabulary we're going to use in this section here. So there's some really good videos. The Khan Academy video goes in a lot of detail looking at the distinction of cardiac muscle cells in relation to skeletal muscle cells. So a lot of differences with the shape, the branching, the number of mitochondria, the differences in our sarcoplasmic reticulum, T-tubules. So a lot of cardiac cell physiology, basically, is what that is. Cardiac muscle cell physiology. The Khan Academy guy does it really good, so I'll let that video kind of do justice to that discussion there. So again, just our discussion then on membrane potential, right? So we said back here, let me back up. We said we're here -70. Well, when we talk specifically about cardiac cells, right, we're not at -70. Cardiac cells reach resting voltage at a -90, right? So they're going to be even farther down here. So -90 is the resting potential for cardiac cells. And then they're going to kind of go all the way up to a +30. And what causes this? The introduction then of our calcium, right? So our calcium cations, these positive charges, cause us to depolarize. And this plateau phase is going to be significant. So this is the generic view of a cardiac cell. All right, so let's look in blue. We start at our -90, resting membrane potential, we start to have some situation here, number one, right? Number one, depolarization is going to be initiated by sodium, right? So sodium is going to be the trigger of our repolarization, right? So we have then our release of sodium, opens up those gates, and we shoot up all the way to a positive 30. Right? And then number two, we reach our plateau phase where the calcium influx now starts to sort of shift our ions there. And this phase here is important, right? And I do want you to know this, and there's some questions on the homework, questions on the exam. A long refractory period. This is very important when it comes to cardiac physiology. Right? And this is very different than skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle has a very short refractory period. Cardiac has a very long refractory period. All right, so what does this mean? And what do we know then about the threshold, right? So the best example I can give you, kind of strange maybe, but everybody has some familiarity with the little handle on the toilet, right? So if this is a little handle, we start to put a little bit of pressure. We hear some sound, but nothing quite happens. Nothing quite happens. Nothing quite happens until you reach that certain threshold, right? That certain, just we go, as they say, that point of no return, right? Once you push far enough, whoosh, we start the whole flushing process, right? And you can keep pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing the little handle, but nothing is going to happen because of the refractory period. It's going to take a while for water to go back into the tank, and it's going to take a little while before we can flush it again, right? So a refractory period. If we apply to the male reproductive system, right? Males, once you're you're having the good time, once we have the release, we'll say, it takes a little while, right? It's a refractory period before another release can happen, right? If you catch my drift there, right? But this is the idea then of a absolute refractory period. It's very long, right? So it takes a long time in order for the cardiac cell to be able to be stimulated again and to contract again. Now, why is this good? Because that allows then the heart to contract and relax, but not to continue contracting, right? So that does not allow the heart to enter a tetanic state. Tetanus is like a cramp, right? So you've had that uncomfortable cramp on your arch, on your calf, right? So that muscle tenses, right? Ladies, during your cycles, you have, again, those uterine contractions, those cramps. Well, what if that happened to the heart? What if the heart contracted and was in a cramp state? In that situation, it's not acting as a pump, right? So this absolute refractory period is really critical for the normal functionality of these cardiac cells. So again, sodium, that slow calcium channel, and then lastly, we have then our potassium. Right? So 3 ions that are responsible for the depolarization and the repolarization of our cardiac cells. So all that kind of basically what I went over a little bit there. More detail, but okay, so that discussion applies to most of the heart, 99% of the heart. But there is that 1% that's a little bit different. So 1% of the cardiac cells are what we're going to call autorhythmic cells. They have automaticity, right? So they are self-excitable. They don't need any stimulation from the nervous system. They take charge of their own beat, and they just automatically cause their own depolarization. Right? They're rhythmic, and they undergo spontaneous depolarization. And there's that long refractory period again. So it's very rhythmic, and again, not able to sustain a contraction, right? So it's a rhythmic, rhythmic contraction, rhythmic depolarization, and we know depolarization triggers then systolic contraction. So these autorhythmic cells are going to have unstable resting potentials. They have leaky, let's say they have leaky channels, right? Sodium slowly leaks in, and because they're autorhythmic, because they're unstable resting potentials, we're going to call them pacemaker potentials, right? Pacemakers. So if you compare this picture, backing up here, with this picture, right? This is for 99% of the heart cells. This is for 1% of the heart cells that we call the autorhythmic cells. So if we notice, we have a lower, or I should say a closer to zero, right? Instead of -90, we're at -60 resting potential. But we don't have a flat resting potential. This shows that we're leaking sodium. We hit threshold and we open the channels, depolarize to just slightly over zero, and then we repolarize, right? So again, we have the sodium channels that are leaking. We go to depolarization, so our calcium now has an effect. And then 3, we start discussing now our potassium. Right? So coming down, we go to -60, and we slowly leak. We reach threshold, we fire, and we continue back to repolarization, right? And this picture is illustrating the autorhythmic cells, the 1% of the heart cells that are automatic. They're automaticity cells, yeah? So when we talk about these autorhythmic cells, right, we start to discuss now the intrinsic cardiac conduction system. So this network of non-contractile, this is important. So we talk about cardiac cells being made of myocardium. Myocardium contracts. Well, these are different, right? These are non-contractile. They can depolarize. Think of them like the wires in your house, right? They're going to conduct electrical signal, but they're not going to actually contract. They're just vessels, they're tubes, pipes for electrical conduction, yeah? So they're autorhythmic cells. They initiate and distribute impulses to coordinate the depolarization, which then leads to the contraction of the heart cells. So they're not the same thing. Depolarization deals with electrical activity. Contraction deals with the shortening of the sarcomeres, but we cannot have contraction without having depolarization. So depolarization sort of is synonymous with contraction, right? And again, all of this pertains to the 1% of our non-contractile autorhythmic cells that initiate and distribute impulses to coordinate depolarization, which leads to the contraction of the heart cell. So, and our cardiac system is going to, or I should say our intrinsic cardiac conduction system is going to be shown in yellow. And there's a good video that shows sort of all the working of the conduction system as well. So when we talk about our conduction system, we're looking at first our sinoatrial node, also known as SA node, right? The SA node, sinoatrial node. And if you see the word atrial, it gives us a little hint. Where do we find these? Well, in the atrium, in the right atrium of the heart. Right? And this is considered to be our pacemaker. It's an autorhythmic cell. It's going to keep the beat, and it's going to keep the beat faster than any other part of the conduction system. So it's going to generate impulses at about 75 beats per minute. And if we're looking at 75 beats per minute, we're talking about sinoatrial sort of regulation of the heartbeat. If the sinoatrial node is taking charge, we call that sinus rhythm, sinoatrial rhythm, sinus rhythm, about 75 beats per minute, right? So this SA node fires, depolarizes faster than any other part of the conduction system than the myocardium. So it will take charge of the heartbeat. So we have the SA node firing. If for whatever reason the SA node is damaged, it's not functioning, we have a second autorhythmic cluster that we call the atrioventricular node, the AV node. Right? So this is a little bit slower, right? It's going to depolarize at about 50 beats per minute, right? So if the SA node is damaged, that drummer is gone. We have another drummer that likes to keep the beat a little bit slower, right? At about 50 beats per minute. Now, what ends up happening here, we have a traffic jam. So the SA node fires, this impulse goes through all the atria, and then it takes a little while, like in traffic. If you have all these lanes open, all of a sudden there's an accident, there's construction. So let's say many lanes convert into one lane. It causes a traffic jam and it slows the flow of traffic, right? So we're gonna have the slowing of the information here. Traffic is slowed, the electrical signal is slowed, and there's gonna be a delay here. And that's normal. It's a normal process in cardiac physiology. So once we have then the signal from the SA node to the AV node, we go to the AV bundle, right? The atrioventricular bundle, or as I learned it back in the olden days, the bundle of His. So I don't know who His was, some old cardiologist that discovered this. But again, this AV bundle is important as it's the only electrical connection between the atria and the ventricles. So we have the top part of the heart beating, the atria, the ventricles beating, but in order for it to be completely synchronous together, we have to have communication between atria and ventricles. And where does that communication happen? At the AV bundle, right? The AV bundle or bundle of His, which is going down the myocardial, or I should say the ventricular septum, right? Deep in the septum, we have this AV bundle. Then we have this branch that starts to go to the right side of the heart, to the left side of the heart, and now we're looking at the bundle branches, right and left bundle branches. So two pathways in the intraventricular septum that carry the impulses towards the apex of the heart. And then once we reach the apex, then we start working up, sort of superiorly up the walls of the myocardium. And that's what we call then the Purkinje fibers or Purkinje cells. So they will complete the pathway into the apex of the ventricular walls. The AV bundle Purkinje fibers depolarize only 30 times per minute in the absence of AV node impulse. So things are going bad for the heart, let's say, right? So if the SA node is damaged, AV node takes charge. If the SA node and the AV node are damaged, the heart can still generate contraction. You still have these autorhythmic cells, but it's going to be beating at 30 times per minute, which is quite slow. It's not enough to keep you happy and healthy, but the heart will still be beating. It may not be enough to keep consciousness, probably is not going to be enough to keep consciousness, but you're still generating a beat of the heart and you're still kind of getting some cardiac output going there. But again, the Purkinje fibers. So just trying to show you all of this thing now in a picture format, right? So we start in the superior area of the right atrium, our SA node, which would then depolarize because of all the gap junctions. We send that signal throughout the whole atria, all the atria, all the atria, all the atria, all the, and then all of that signal eventually makes its way to that AV node, right? The atrioventricular node. We have that little traffic delay, a traffic jam. Then we take that signal into the ventricles, right? And there's our AV bundle. This is the only connection then that links the atria with the ventricles. So our AV bundle, bundle of His, And then we have our bundle branches, the right bundle branch, left bundle branch. We go towards the apex, and then we start to work our way back superiorly to the rest of the myocardial walls here. Right? And that's then our Purkinje fibers. So just like when I hit the light switch, it's going to send that signal up and over into the light, turning on the fan, the light bulb, whatever. It's the same thing for the heart. It's wired. We have the electrical wiring system, this electrical conduction system that will then take the signal throughout the heart. Right? So, and we know this, wherever the electrical signal goes, we then have the depolarization, and where depolarization happens, we have then muscular contraction, the myocardial systole, myocardial systolic contractions. So a couple of imbalances, and I don't know if I did get to these in the other discussion. I don't know how far I got. Let me back up here, let me forward. Just get to a couple. I don't remember again where the error was last time, but looking at just a couple of imbalances that should help you with the ECG interpretation. So some things that can go wrong with the electrical aspect of the heart. We can have arrhythmias. So instead of being rhythmic, we have a missed beat or a delay. There's some sort of non-rhythmic sort of contraction. And if we have non-rhythmic contractions, we know that we're having non-rhythmic depolarization events, right? So that's the arrhythmia. We can have uncoordinated atrioventricular contractions. So the atria can start to work independent than the ventricles. That's normally some sort of heart block. We're not sending the signal properly through that AV bundle. The worst of the worst is fibrillation, right? Fibrillation is like twitching. I don't know if you've ever had that little eyelid that twitches and twitches and twitches, or you've had a little muscle that twitches. Imagine the heart is doing that. It's not beating, it's not contracting and relaxing, it's just kind of twitching. That's not good. That's not going to be forceful enough to keep blood kind of flowing through that heart. Right? So this is a medical emergency, has to be defibrillated immediately. The ventricular fibrillation is one of the types of heart attacks, as they call. So there's not enough coordinated depolarization to allow for that strong contraction. So we have to defibrillate, shock the system, jolt the system, kind of get everything reset so that our SA node, AV node, whoever can kind of get that signal going, and everything is synchronized. Everything is actually acting as a syncytial contraction there. So we've kind of talked a little bit about this. If we have defective SA node, if we're no longer in sinus rhythm, we then would have another part of the electrical conduction system take over. And our first option would be the AV node. So if we're not in sinus rhythm, 75 beats per minute, if we're then in AV node dominance, we call that junctional rhythm. Junctional rhythm will happen, and once that occurs, we're going to be between 40 to 60 beats per minute. Around 50 is sort of the average. If for whatever reason the AV node is not able to send the signal to the AV bundle, then we have a separation. So the top part of the heart is completely independent of the bottom part of the heart. And that's what we call heart block, right? Partial or total heart block, depending on how many of these signals make it to the ventricles. So I think, I'm pretty sure the electrocardiography has been covered in the other video. I'm going to pause it here now. I'll go back and check. If not, I'll record another video on the ECGs here. But that should get you on track now. I apologize. I thought these things got recorded on the first time I tried this. But again, thank you for letting me know. And I hope this helps you. If there was any questions, again, I hope this clarifies those a little bit. And I'll again see what's happening on the other ones, see if everything has been covered that needs to be covered. So with that, I'll see you on the next video. Yep, you'll have a good one.